Hey there! Welcome back to True Crime Echoes, where forgotten stories, hidden truths, and strange echoes from history finally get the attention they deserve. Today's episode is going to feel a little different because we're not talking about serial killers or cults, at least not in the way you might expect. We're talking about board games, the ones sitting in your closet, the ones you grew up with. But behind the dice, the cards, the tiny plastic pieces there are real stories. Stories of stolen inventions, spiritual obsession, family tragedy, even murder. So pull up a chair, settle in, and get ready. Because once you hear what's hiding behind these so-called games, you may never look at them the same way again. This is the dark history of board games, the dark history. Chapter 1. Introduction. You ever have one of those weird days where something just feels off? It happened to me not too long ago. I was digging through my closet trying to find something totally unrelated. Halloween decorations, I think, and out of nowhere something falls and hits me square on the head. At first I thought it was just a random old box. But when I looked down, it was a Ouija board. Now here's the thing, I don't own a Ouija board. Or at least, I don't remember ever buying one. I just stared at it for a second, trying to figure out where it came from. It wasn't dusty, it wasn't new, it was just there, sitting in my hands like it had been waiting for me. And maybe it's the Halloween spirit in the air, or maybe it's just that eerie feeling that comes when the days start getting shorter and the nights colder, but I felt something. I won't say it was supernatural, but I won't say it wasn't either. That little moment got me thinking. We all see the Ouija board as just a game, right? It's sitting on the same toy store shelves as Candyland and Uno, but unlike those games, the Ouija board claims to talk to the dead, spirits, ghosts, entities, whatever you want to call them, and we're okay with that. We just hand this thing to kids and say, go ahead, summon whoever's out there. That was the spark. I started researching not just Ouija boards, but board games in general. And what I found was way darker than I expected. Games that were designed with moral lessons, spiritual messages, even psychological manipulation. And sometimes, they led to murder. I'm not kidding. So today we're diving deep into the forgotten stories, the hidden origins, the unsettling truths, and yes, the real-life crimes connected to some of the world's most popular board games. This is the kind of history they don't teach in school. But maybe they should. Welcome to True Crime Echoes, and welcome to the dark history of board games. Chapter 2. Ancient Games, Spiritual Lessons. You know what's funny? The more I looked into board games, the more I realized they weren't always just for fun. Some of them were deadly serious. Long before Monopoly, before Yahtzee, even before the Ouija board, people were playing games. But these games weren't designed to kill time during a rainy weekend. They were reflections of life-death morality and sometimes fate. One of the earliest board games ever discovered came from ancient Mesopotamia. It's called the Royal Game of Yeah, as in you are. That name might not sound impressive now, but this game dates back to 2400 BC. It was carved into stone, played by royalty, and believed to reveal your destiny. Players would roll dice and move their pieces along a 20-square board, landing on certain tiles that were said to predict your future. Not in a vague horoscope kind of way, but specific things, like whether you'd be successful in love, win a legal battle, or suffer loss. Imagine playing a game where every move could tell you how your life would unfold. It wasn't just entertainment, it was spiritual. And it wasn't the only one. Take Chutes and Ladders, for example. Most of us remember it as a sweet little game we played as kids. Slide down a chute, climb up a ladder, repeat. But its origins are anything but childish. The original version came from ancient India and was called Moksha Patam. It was a moral journey designed to teach players about karma and the spiritual consequences of their actions. The ladders represented virtues, things like kindness, humility, generosity. The chutes, or originally snakes, symbolized vices like greed, pride, and anger. If you climbed high, you were reaching enlightenment. If you fell, you were falling away from spiritual truth. It wasn't just about winning, it was about learning how to be a better human being. Even the game of life, yes, the one with the tiny cars and plastic pegs, was originally rooted in moral philosophy. The first version, created in the 1860s, rewarded players for living a virtuous Christian life. Things like honesty, hard work, and charity would move you ahead. Immorality, vanity, and laziness, you were punished. Not just by losing, but by landing on squares like prison or ruin. Board games used to teach us how to live, or at least how society thought we should live. But then, something changed. As we moved into the late 19th century, a new kind of board game began to emerge. One that didn't just teach you morals, it claimed to connect you with the dead. It didn't want you to be a better person. It wanted you to believe you could speak with someone who had crossed over. And that's where things start to get darker. Because once you open that door, even if it's just a game, it's hard to know what or who might come through. And that brings us to the Ouija board. Ouija. We've all heard of it. Some of us have even tried it. But very few people know the full story, where it came from, why it became so popular, and the trail of obsession, tragedy, and even murder that it left behind. In the next chapter, we're going to go deeper, much deeper, because the Ouija board isn't just a party trick or a Halloween novelty. It's the centerpiece of some of the most chilling true stories I've ever come across, and trust me, you're going to want to hear them. Chapter 3, Whispers Through the Board. I'll be honest. I've never actually used a Ouija board, not once. Not because I don't believe in ghosts or spirits or whatever you want to call them. It's more like I don't want to find out. You know, I've always felt like if something is on the other side, maybe it's best to leave it there. There's just something about the idea of putting your hands on a piece of wood, asking a question, and watching that little planchette slide across the board that makes my skin crawl. Even if it's just a game, why risk it? But that's the thing, some people don't see it as a risk at all. Some people see it as an invitation. Back in the late 1800s, America was in a strange place. The Civil War had ended, but it left behind hundreds of thousands of dead. Entire families were ripped apart. It wasn't just the soldiers, either disease, famine, poverty. Death was everywhere. And with death came grief. An entire generation was looking for closure, answers, a way to say goodbye. And that's when spiritualism stepped in. Spiritualism was more than just a trend. It was a belief system, one that said the dead could communicate with the living if you just knew how to listen. Seances were popping up everywhere. Mediums claimed they could speak to loved ones in the afterlife. People were desperate to believe them. Among the most famous of these mediums were the Fox sisters, who supposedly communicated with spirits through a series of knocks and taps. People were mesmerized. They sold out live performances, toured the country, and became household names. But years later, it came out that the sisters had been faking the whole thing, cracking their toe joints under the table to simulate the spirit knocks. It was all a trick, but by then it didn't matter. The public had already bought in. As spiritualism became more mainstream, people began experimenting with ways to communicate with the dead at home. And that's where the Ouija board comes in. In 1890, a lawyer named Elijah Bond filed a patent for a device that could communicate with spirits. It was basically a flat board with letters and numbers and a small heart-shaped planchette that moved as participants placed their hands on it. What's wild is that the board literally named itself. Elijah's sister-in-law asked the board what it wanted to be called, and it spelled out Ouija. When they asked what that meant, the board supposedly responded, "Good luck." Right, totally normal and not ominous at all. Despite, or maybe because of how spooky it was, the board took off. People were fascinated. It was sold in toy stores, marketed as entertainment for the whole family, and soon it wasn't just being used at seances. It was in bedrooms, living rooms, schoolyards. People were using it like it was a magic mirror, hoping to speak with something on the other side. One of those people was William Fuld. William wasn't the original inventor, but he eventually became the face of the Ouija board business. He believed in it completely. He used it to make business decisions, even consulted it for financial advice. At one point, he asked the board whether he should expand his factory, and the board told him yes. So he built a massive new plant to keep up with growing demand. But in 1927, while inspecting that very factory, William leaned against a railing and fell. 3 stories down, He died of massive internal injuries. Some say it was an accident. Others believe the Ouija board led him to his death literally. But that's just the beginning. One of the most chilling cases tied to the Ouija board happened in Buffalo, New York in 1930. It started like a lot of stories do, with a secret. Clotilde Marchand was a respected artist, a mother of 5, and the wife of a museum sculptor named Henri Marchand. Together they had moved from France to the US and built a quiet life. From the outside they looked like the perfect family, but Henry had a secret. He was having an affair with one of his models, a young Seneca woman named Lila Jimerson. Now Henry claimed the relationship was purely professional. He even told police that he only slept with Lila so she would agree to pose nude for. Chapter 4. The Stolen Game. There's something about Monopoly that always rubbed me the wrong way. Maybe it's the endless gameplay, the fake money that somehow brings out the worst in people, or how it turns friends and family into cutthroat landlords overnight. I never really liked it, but I never expected it to be connected to a real-life case of exploitation and injustice either. Turns out Monopoly wasn't invented by a man named Charles Darrow. Not really. The real creator was a woman, Elizabeth Magee. And the story of how her game was stolen, twisted, and sold by someone else is honestly one of the most infuriating parts of this entire history. Elizabeth, or Lizzie, as she was often called, was way ahead of her time. She was born in 1866, the daughter of an abolitionist who had worked alongside Abraham Lincoln. From the beginning, she questioned everything, especially the way wealth and power were distributed in America. Lizzie was outspoken, fiercely, intelligent, and politically engaged. She worked as a stenographer, a writer, a poet, even an actress. And she was deeply concerned with the growing economic inequality she saw around her, how the rich kept getting richer and the poor, they stayed poor. So she came up with a way to teach people what was really happening, a board game. In 1903, she created the Landlord's Game. It was designed to show how unchecked capitalism could destroy communities. The goal wasn't just to win, it was to demonstrate how one player could accumulate all the wealth while the others slowly lost everything. It was supposed to make people think. And here's the thing, it worked. People played it in colleges, in progressive circles, in labor union meetings. It spread slowly, but it spread. Lizzie believed in it so much that she applied for a patent. And in 1904, she got it, an incredible accomplishment for a woman at that time. Fewer than 1% of U.S. patents went to women back then. But Lizzie pushed through. She believed in her game and in the message behind it. But like a lot of women who blazed trails too early, Lizzie would soon be erased. In the 1930s, the Great Depression hit. People were unemployed, broke, and desperate for distraction. That's when a man named Charles Darrow came across a version of Lizzie's game. He didn't invent it. He didn't even credit it. But he did something Lizzie never did. He commercialized it. Darrow added illustrations, polished up the board, and called it something new Monopoly. He began selling it to department stores. And because people were stuck at home with nothing to do, the game took off. Everyone wanted a piece of the fantasy, pretending to own property, collect rent, build an empire. It was an escape. Soon Monopoly caught the attention of a struggling game company, Parker Brothers. At first they hated it. Too complicated, they said. But Darrow's version was selling like crazy. So Parker Brothers bought it. They paid Darrow a lump sum plus royalties. He became a millionaire. Meanwhile, Lizzie. She was still struggling to make ends meet. When Parker Brothers realized Monopoly had been based on her original idea, they had a problem. They couldn't afford a scandal, not while the game was flying off the shelves. So they tracked Lizzie down. And what did they do? Apologize, offer her fair compensation. No. They offered her $500. No royalties. No credit. Just a quick, clean transaction to secure the patent and bury her name. They told her they'd help develop her other board game ideas. They never did. Lizzie believed them. She thought they saw her value. But really, they saw her as a threat. She died in 1948, largely forgotten. Even her obituary didn't mention Monopoly. Her invention had become one of the most successful board games of all time, and her name was nowhere on it. It wasn't until the 1970s that her story started to resurface. A man named Ralph Anspach, a professor who was fighting a legal battle with Parker Brothers over his own anti-monopoly game, began digging into the origins. What he found was undeniable. Elizabeth Magie had been the true creator all along. It took decades to uncover the truth, and honestly, most people still don't know. Every time we sit down to play Monopoly, we're holding a piece of stolen history, a game meant to warn us, turned into a celebration of everything it tried to criticize. It makes you wonder how many other stories like Lizzie's are still buried, how many voices were silenced because someone else saw an opportunity to profit. In the end, Monopoly isn't just a board game, it's a mirror, one that reflects how power really works and how easily the truth can be bought buried and forgotten. But not here. Not today. We remember Lizzie. Chapter 5. A game no one wanted to play. There's something deeply sad about a crime that happens on Christmas. You think of that day as sacred quiet, full of warmth, family food lights, maybe even laughter. But sometimes, that picture-perfect setting makes the darkness feel even darker. This next story isn't well known. In fact, it's one of those cases that slips under the radar because it sounds too strange, too absurd to be real. But it happened, and it all started with something as simple as a board game. Yahtzee, I know. That game with the little dice shaker where you yell Yahtzee. When you get five of a kind, it's loud. It's harmless. It's not even that competitive. But in 2010, for one family in Minnesota, Yahtzee would be the spark that lit a powder keg already soaked in tension. Tamara Lee Mason was a mother of 3 sons. By most accounts, she was a loving parent, a little quirky, maybe a little intense, but she cared. That Christmas, she had one simple wish: she wanted to play Yahtzee with her boys. It had been a tradition, one of those low-stakes post-dinner things that families do to feel close again. The kind of game you play when everyone's full and the house is quiet when you want to hold on to the moment before the holiday ends. But this time, her sons didn't want to play. And I know that sounds trivial, right? Just a board game. Say no and move on. But Tamara didn't let it go. She kept asking. She pushed, maybe nagged, maybe begged, and at some point that little request, innocent, even sweet, turned into something else, something dangerous. Her youngest son, Jacob, snapped. It's still hard to wrap my head around what happened next. The police later said that Jacob attacked Tamara in the living room. He put a plastic bag over her head and used a belt to strangle her. His 2 older brothers were there watching, and they didn't stop him. She died on Christmas night. Afterwards, the brothers just left her there, in the house. It was cold Minnesota cold, so the body didn't decompose quickly. The next day, they moved her to a shed behind the house, where the freezing temperatures kept her body from smelling, from raising suspicion. 2 days later, on December 27th, the brothers reported her missing. They told police a story said she got upset after an argument and stormed off into the night. Said they hadn't seen her since. They even mentioned the Yahtzee game in their lie, using it to frame her as emotionally unstable. Like she had overreacted. Like the whole thing was just her being dramatic. It worked. For a while. It wasn't until months later, when the snow began to melt and the ground thawed, that things started to unravel. The boys, for reasons that still don't make sense, began bragging about the murder to a friend. Yeah, they talked about it. Like it was a joke, like it was a story they owned. That friend went to the police. Thank God. When officers returned to the Mason home, they found Tamara's body buried in a shallow grave in the backyard. By that point, the brothers had moved her from the shed and tried to cover their tracks. Chapter 6. When the game stops being a game. When I started researching the history of board games, I didn't expect to find any of this. I thought maybe I'd uncover some weird trivia, like the original Monopoly tokens were made out of Cracker Jack prizes, or that ancient people used bones as dice. And yeah, those things are true. But what I found went so much deeper than I expected. What started as a lighthearted curiosity turned into something much darker, and honestly, more human. It turns out board games have always reflected the world around them. Even the simplest ones carry a message. The royal game of It wasn't just a game, it was a way of interpreting fate. Chutes and Ladders taught kids about karma and morality. The game of life preached virtue and Christian values. These weren't just pastimes. They were mirrors holding up society's beliefs, fears, and hopes. But somewhere along the way, that mirror started showing something else: greed, deception, obsession, and in the worst cases, violence. The Ouija board promised a connection to the dead, but left behind a trail of very real bodies. The Monopoly board was meant to warn us about economic injustice, and instead it became a celebration of it, thanks to a stolen idea and a silenced woman. And Yahtzee. Well, that one still haunts me. A game no one wanted to play, and a mother who died simply for asking. It makes you wonder, why do games bring out the best in some people and the absolute worst in others? Is it just competition? Is it control? Or is it something deeper? Something we don't even realize is happening. Maybe games strip away the surface and show us who we really are. Maybe when the stakes feel fake, we let our masks fall off, not realizing the damage we're doing in real life. Or maybe some people were already broken before they sat down at the table. Either way, the message is clear. Even something as innocent as a game can carry the weight of our darkest impulses. We bring ourselves to the board, our fears, our pride, our grief, our anger, and sometimes that's all it takes for something to go horribly wrong. So next time you roll the dice or shuffle the cards or reach for that old game box on the shelf, maybe pause for a second. Think about the history. Think about the people behind it, the ones who made it, the ones who were betrayed by it, and the ones who never walked away from it. Because sometimes the most dangerous stories don't come from the news. They come from right inside our homes. Chapter 7. Closing Thoughts and Echoes. If you've made it this far, first of all, thank you. Truly. I know this episode took us on a strange path. From ancient tombs to cold Minnesota winters, from spiritual movements to corporate theft. It's not the kind of content you usually expect when you think of board games, but that's exactly why I wanted to tell it. Because what looks harmless on the surface can hold something much heavier underneath. I used to think of board games as background noise, things we pull out when the power goes out, or when family visits over the holidays. I never thought they had the power to influence people, or to become tangled in real-life tragedy. But now I see them differently. They're cultural artifacts, time capsules, and sometimes unintentional confessions. We've talked a lot today about invention, injustice, and obsession, but what really stood out to me, what stuck with me long after I stepped away from the script, was how much we overlook the human stories behind the things we use every day. A woman creates a game to fight inequality and dies forgotten. A mother asks her sons to play with her and never gets up from the living room floor. A man builds a factory on the advice of a spirit and never makes it back home. And all of that is real, not fiction, not folklore, just the part of history that most people don't tell you. That's why I started this channel. True Crime Echoes isn't about shock value or turning pain into entertainment. It's about going deeper, finding the stories that got buried, the voices that were ignored, the details that were too uncomfortable to make the headlines. It's about asking, how did this happen? And also, why did we forget it? So if this episode made you feel something, curiosity, anger, sadness, even just surprise, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Let me know in the comments. Tell me your own memories of playing games with your family. Or maybe tell me if a game ever brought out a side of someone you didn't expect. I won't judge. And if you've got suggestions for stories you think deserve to be heard, I'm always listening. Next week, we're shifting gears, but not too far. We're diving into something even older than board games. Something rooted in folklore, fear, and centuries of obsession. We're talking about vampires. Not the romantic, glittery kind. We're going to trace the real history. Where did the legend begin? Who were the real people behind the stories? And how did society use the fear of blood-sucking monsters to explain the unexplainable? It's darker. It's stranger. And yeah, it gets a little weird. So if that's your thing, I'll see you next Thursday. Until then, stay curious, ask questions, and remember, history doesn't always echo through textbooks. Sometimes it whispers through the things we thought we already understood. Take care of yourself, and don't forget, it's just a game until it's not. Thanks for spending time with me today and for going on this strange, unsettling ride through the hidden side of something so ordinary. If you enjoyed this episode or if it surprised you in any way, please consider subscribing, leaving a comment, or sharing this with someone who might appreciate stories that go deeper than just headlines. On True Crime Echoes, we don't just chase the shocking moment, we dig into why it happened, who got forgotten, and what that says about us. New episodes drop every Thursday, and trust me, what's coming next is something you don't want to miss. Until then, stay curious, stay kind, and remember, the past isn't always gone. Sometimes it just waits in silence until someone's ready to listen. I'll see you soon.